It can bring morality to the world that is not easily corrupted, as is the religious morality that divides people, that gives people license to be immoral because they've been so good. It is the one sentence, the one message, the one statement that can do for the world exactly what the world needs. What is a truly great leader? Before we even get to a universal leader. And interestingly, there was I mentioned this before, there was a writer, a book that came out, written by a man who worked in the United Nations under Waldheim. And the book is basically a description of the election process by which the General Secretary of the Security Council is chosen. And he shows there how the system is fallible, it's corruptible, and explains in that way how it's possible for a Nazi to become the spokesman of the world, at least symbolically. And then at the end of the book, he suggests that a new system be installed, and that what should happen is that a worldwide search should be conducted to find the one person best qualified to speak for the world. Which is a very non-parochial, non-sectarian way of saying Mashiach. Not that Mashiach would necessarily want to sit in the UN, but that the world needs one person best qualified to guide the world. And as the world becomes a smaller and smaller place, and as nations become more and more interdependent, it becomes all and more necessary and relevant to have one person speak for the world. Because as soon as you have two, there's trouble. Then you're trying to decide things by committee, and that never works. So the world needs a leader. What is a leader? What is true leadership? Well, many qualities are taken for granted or assumed. Obviously, you want somebody who's intelligent, you want somebody who's honest, you want somebody who works hard, all the common things. Some of the things we don't always think about is that real leadership comes from a person who takes full responsibility for that position. There are people who are in positions of leadership because of circumstances. How they got there exactly is not clear, but they have authority. But they don't want that authority. It was forced on them. And so they do their job, they work, they make decisions, they call the shots, but deep down inside, they don't want the responsibility. And that, although it's subtle, should really disqualify a person from the position. You can't really be a leader if you don't accept full responsibility. So if in the final moment of crisis, you turn around and say, well, I never really wanted this anyway, then you've just shrugged off the whole responsibility, and that's not a responsible leader. So the first thing is that if we're going to have a true leader of people, it has to be someone who can accept full responsibility for that leadership. It can't be someone who will do the job as long as it's comfortable, but if it gets too heavy, he quits. There's no quitting. It's to the end. Very few people have that. There are, of course, those who want leadership. They want to be leaders. They accept the privileges of leadership, but they're not comfortable deep down inside with the responsibility that brings with it. A mature, responsible, honest human being doesn't look for that kind of a responsibility. It's awesome. it's difficult to be consistent. It's difficult to constantly be adjusting yourself to the needs of others, which is what a leader has to do. So the average intelligent, responsible, mature individual would never accept that kind of responsibility. How can I be responsible for someone else's life? And yet that's what a leader has to do. Take that kind of responsibility. So when you have people who say, well, if you want my advice, I suggest you do such and such. But it's not my responsibility, it's your decision, you do as you see fit. My suggestion is such and such. But it's not my, don't put the responsibility on me. Don't put it on my shoulders, it's your decision. Well, that's an advisor maybe, but certainly not a leader. A leader has to put his life on the line. He's got to put himself fully behind every decision that he makes. There's a professor from Russia who was a refusnik, and he's very big in his field. He came to see the Rebbe. And when people have been to see the Rebbe, the Chassidim want to hear some kind of reaction, because you get a different reaction from different people. So when he came out of his 2-hour visit with the Rebbe, the response that he came out with, or the reaction that he had, was that he was amazed and impressed by the fact that the Rebbe can make decisions for other people, many times life and death decisions, and not second guess himself. Once he's made the decision, it's done. He sticks by it, he's confident of it, he doesn't rethink, he doesn't mull it over, and he never changes his mind. And he does all this without consulting with anybody. Now, among us, mortals, if we made decisions without consulting, we would be negligent. That would be irresponsible on our part. If we never rethought our decisions, if we never doubted the truth or the rightfulness of our decisions, that would be very arrogant and again irresponsible on our part. And if after making decisions for other people, which we really shouldn't do, but if we did make decisions for other people that are life and death decisions, and then could go to sleep and sleep with a clear conscience, there would be something wrong with us. Because given our wisdom, our strength, and our insight, we had better consult, we had better rethink and mull over our decisions, and then if we make a life and death decision for somebody, we shouldn't be able to sleep that night. That, for us, would be responsible. That would be moral. But that's because we are not leaders. A true leader has the capacity to take full responsibility without hesitation, not only for the outcome, which he will never shrug and say, well, I didn't think it would turn out that way, but also for the rightfulness of the decision itself. So he doesn't rethink it, and he doesn't have to lose sleep over it. Because that's a true leader. Another thing Torah tells us about true leaders, they're born that way. And that's why there are stories about King David, for example. God chose King David to be the king of Israel because when he was a young boy taking care of sheep, he showed in his tending the sheep, he showed signs of true leadership. And the same with Moshe, that before God chose him to be the leader of his people, he first observed how he tended his sheep and saw their signs of leadership. One of the signs of Moshe's greatness was that even as a child, growing up in the palace, he was consumed by compassion and concern for his fellow Jew. And so when he saw the Jew suffering, he couldn't just stand by and allow it to go on. And when he saw an Egyptian about to kill a Jew, he put his life on the line defending the Jew, and then had to flee Egypt and so on. So already in their youth, the true leaders show signs of leadership. They make a decision, they act on that decision, regardless of the consequences, and it is the right decision, and they're willing to pay the price for it. The story about the previous Rebbe, who was a 12-year-old boy walking through the market when he saw a Russian policeman manhandling an elderly Jew. And if you can imagine back in those days, the fear that a Jew had of a policeman, it was awesome. Anything that sounded like police, anything that sounded like someone who cooperated with the police, anything that came within 10 blocks of a police station terrified the Jew, even the most powerful Jew. And here a 12-year-old kid sees a policeman beating up an elderly Jew, and without thinking twice, he jumped on the policeman. Of course, he was thrown into jail, and that was the first of 5 times that he was imprisoned by the Russians. But the point of it is, a 12-year-old boy knows what he's going to do, knows what he has to do, and is not intimidated by the consequences. And he goes ahead and he does it. That's the beginning of true leadership. And it always begins at very young. In fact, it said of some great leader, I forget who it was, it said that when he was a child and he was playing with other children, they would play horse and wagon or something. But he would never be the horse. He would always be the rider. Like there was an element of leadership to him that everybody sensed. Even the other kids sensed it. They never asked him to be the horse. There was always somebody else was the horse, but he was always the rider. The Rebbe's mother, who lived next door in the apartment building next door to us when we were growing up, tells a story about her son, about the Rebbe, when he was 9 years old or so. They were at the seashore, at the Black Sea, when suddenly she looked down and she noticed that the boy was gone. She became concerned and she went looking for him. And she sees that by the water, by the edge of the water, there's a commotion. There's a crowd of people, there's a commotion. And she really got scared. So she runs over there. She finds out that a boy had been swimming and he had lost his bearing or something and was drowning. And the Rebbe, the 9-year-old boy, had jumped in to save him. Not that the Rebbe was an excellent swimmer or anything, but somebody's drowning, you jump in and save. So the beginnings of leadership were already visible in a 9-year-old, in that no one had to tell him what to do. It was clear to him what he had to do. And the consequences, the possibilities of getting into trouble himself, doesn't intimidate him. There was another occasion in the Rebbe's life when he was a teenager. They were hiding in a bunker. And they had to be very silent because they didn't want the soldiers up there to hear them. And the children, every now and then, the child would start to cry. And without being asked or without being told, the Rebbe simply went from child to child as the child started to cry, and quickly found a way to entertain the child, to calm the child down and get him to stop crying. When there was a plague that was killing people left and right in the Ukraine, and the hospitals were full of people in various stages of disease, the Rebbe volunteered as a nurse's aide, worked in the hospital and tended to people, and eventually came down with the illness himself, and was very serious. And in his fever, in his delirium, his mother says she would go in to check on him, and in his delirium he was repeating or mouthing whole sections of Kabbalah that he had been studying. When the plague started a second time, years later, the Rebbe went again to volunteer. So, these are the 2 points. Number one, there is never an indecision. There's never a moment of indecisiveness. There's always a clarity of vision. This is what has to be done. And then, nothing intimidates the leader from doing what he knows needs to be done. That was the reaction that this professor had, that the Rebbe makes decisions without hesitation and then can go to sleep at night. And this is one of the things that is amazing about the Rebbe. Whether you understand Hasidus or the role of Rebbe and Hasidim or not, you have to marvel at the Rebbe's decision, for example, a number of years ago, to not move from Crown Heights. Everybody was moving. The crime rate was shooting up. It was terrible. It was dangerous to walk in the streets. People were being mugged. Everybody was leaving Crown Heights. And the Rebbe says, we are not leaving. In fact, all those Lubavitchers who were living outside of Crown Heights were asked to move to Crown Heights. And they did. Now, the Rebbe tells 1,000 families to stay in a dangerous neighborhood on principle, because you don't dismantle a community. Inevitably, when people run, the elderly are left behind. They have no place to run. They don't have the kayach to run. The poor are left behind. They can't afford the better neighborhood. And so what you're basically doing is abandoning the helpless, dismantling institutions that have been existent for years and years, schools and shuls and yeshivas and so on. And then what's going to happen? The crime will reach the new neighborhood. And then you'll dismantle it again. On principle, the Rebbe says we're not moving anywhere. So, you tell 1,000 families to stay in a dangerous place on principle, and then you can go to sleep at night? That is amazing. And then what happens the first time somebody comes to you and says, Rebbe, I was mugged. I was beaten up. They broke my arm. Now do you have some doubts about your decision? No. Can you sleep that night? If you're a leader, yes. Another thing about a true leader. The Rebbe once used the word empathy. Somebody once asked the Rebbe, how do you know what to tell people? How do you know how to say the right thing to everybody? How do you know what other people need to hear? So the Rebbe said, it's not a trick. There's no trick to it. It's empathy. When you empathize with another person, when you are able to put yourself in the other person's shoes, then it becomes very obvious what that person needs. The only reason the person doesn't know himself what he needs is because he's too close. He can't think objectively because it's so important to him personally that he can't be objective. He can't think straight. The other person, the outsider, can maybe offer advice because he's not personally involved, He's not subjectively concerned with this, so he can give an objective opinion. And the objective opinion could be a lot better than the subjective opinion that the person himself will come up with. But then it may not be the right opinion, because he is an outsider after all. So he has the advantage of being able to be objective, but he has the disadvantage in that he's disinterested. He doesn't appreciate fully what that person is going through, precisely because he's the outsider. So in order to really give good advice, you have to empathize, not just sympathize. And empathy means you put yourself in that person's place. When you put yourself in the other person's place, then you have two advantages. Number one, you're not personally, subjectively involved. On the other hand, you see the issue, you see the problem from the perspective of the person, not from your perspective. Because you're looking at it from within his shoes, and yet you're not him. And so it becomes immediately clear what that person needs to hear, what that person needs to do. And here's the greatness of a true leader. The ability to put yourself in the shoes of anyone who comes to you. We all have a certain capacity for empathy. We meet certain people that we immediately feel connection. We can put ourselves in their shoes very easily because we've got so much in common. So a certain amount of empathy we have, but to be able to empathize with everyone we meet, that's almost impossible. Humanly impossible. A leader is a leader to the degree that he can empathize with people. If he can empathize with 100 people, then he's a leader of 100 people. If he can empathize with 1,000, then he is the head of thousands. If he can empathize with 10,000, then he's the head of 10,000. If he can empathize with everybody, then he's a world leader. The ability to empathize, or the talent, also comes along with a lot of hard work. It is physically exhausting to empathize with people. Somebody once asked previous Rebbe's father, his grandfather, why is it that on a night when people come to visit the Rebbe and he sees 20, 30, 40 people, why is it that he's so exhausted? More exhausted than if he's sitting and teaching for the same number of hours. When he's sitting by the desk, people come in, they talk. Another person comes in, they talk some more. Why is it so exhausting that after the visit, the evenings of visitations, the Rebbe's clothing can be wrung from perspiration when he's sitting in one place, not moving? So the Rebbe said, putting yourself into a person's shoes takes a lot of effort. Then getting yourself back out of there takes effort. You got to readjust. Then you put yourself into the next person's shoes. So if you have, let's say, 30-minute visits, every half hour you have to undress yourself from that person's shoes, dress yourself into the next person's shoes, and you have maybe a minute to do it in. Very exhausting. You have to be healthy, physically healthy, to be able to do that for any length of time. An example of dressing in another person's shoes, putting yourself in another person's shoes. There's a 14-year-old girl who attends a Chabad day school. And on her birthday, she decided to write to the Rebbe. This was years ago. So she writes to the Rebbe that it's going to be her birthday, she wants a blessing for her birthday, and so on. But she also wanted to give the Rebbe a blessing. She wanted to wish the Rebbe that the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin should have children. But she was ashamed. I mean, who is she to? And if anybody else saw that she was writing, she's giving the Rebbe blessings, people would think it a little funny. So she was a little bit ashamed to do that. So what she did is she picked a code in which to write the bracha. She made up a code in which to write the bracha, and she wrote it in little letters on the side of her letter. She gets back an answer from the Rebbe, blessing for her birthday, wishing her good things, and so on. And then, again, on the side of the letter, written in little letters, was something in a code. The same code that she had used. And it was basically, in Hebrew, it was the words, Toida al habracha. Thank you for your blessing. But it was in the same code. So the Rebbe, you don't have to be brilliant to figure out a code that a 14-year-old comes up with. That's not the point. The point is you have to put yourself into that frame of mind. Here the Rebbe gets a sack of letters on a given day. And he's got people waiting who have to make decisions, life and death decisions, sometimes more important than that, $1 million decisions. and they're waiting for the Rebbe. They've got deadlines. They've got, and that the Rebbe can open this letter and first of all take the little girl seriously enough to even care what it says in the code. Mumbo jumbo. To work it out. And then be kind enough and considerate enough to write back in the same code. Because people are going to ask the girl, what is this about? She was ashamed. That's why she wrote in code. It's the consideration takes so much effort. I'm not talking about how, it's nice to be so considerate. It's nice that the Rebbe is so sensitive and so kind. But beyond that, it takes time and it takes effort to go through those steps. And you've got big things on your mind. You've got big decisions to make. Didn't matter. Another quality concerning leadership. On the one hand, there has to be a complete acceptance of the responsibility of the position. And on the other hand, there has to be a total humility about oneself in order to be a true leader. I will take full responsibility, but I don't really count. Now that's an interesting combination there. It's not really me. I don't matter. I don't count. And yet, I will take full responsibility. So on the one hand, not to hesitate to make life and death decisions and accept fully the responsibility of that decision. And on the other hand, who am I to make decisions? That transparency, that humility, that isn't really humility. It's not an assumed humility, a contrived humility. Along with this full responsibility is a very strange combination. Usually, if you're going to be willing to take the responsibility, then you expect people to take you seriously. If I'm going to take responsibility for your life and death decisions, I want you to obey me, I want you to listen to me, I want you to report to me, and I want you to be indebted to me. You owe me. None of that. Moshe says, for example, for 40 years I have suffered with these people. I've struggled with them. I've tried to make mention out of them. And during those 40 years, have I ever taken anything from them? Have I ever asked anything from them? That combination, that's true leadership. It's not, I never asked them for anything, so now they owe me even more. I never asked them for anything because they don't owe me anything. I don't get paid for this. It's not a job. They're not indebted to me. They owe me nothing. While at the same time, full responsibility. When I was around bar mitzvah age, I went to 770 for the first time. Somebody was telling me about the Rebbe in glowing terms, his brilliance, his genius, his talent, his kindness. So I was very impressed. And although my biggest hero then was Mickey Mantle, I went to see the Rebbe with the feeling of a 13-year-old about to see a great person. It was around Ma'ariv time, evening time, and the people were standing around the Rebbe. The room was very full. The Rebbe was standing in a corner by the door with a little lectern and he was davening. And I managed to find my way to the front of the crowd, to the front of the group. So I was standing very close to the Rebbe. And here I am, in awe. I mean, I'm standing next to this great man that I've heard so much about and so on, who was bigger than life. And at that age, in general, you tend to idolize and to worship heroes and so on. So I'm standing next to the Rebbe, and it came to the part of the davening where you bow. In general, when the Rebbe davens, it's very different from anybody else. You're supposed to shuckle in davening. Right? You're supposed to get your body involved in the davening. So you have to move. You have to sway in the davening. So most people I know, most people I've ever seen davening, sway in the davening by shaking or bending at the waist. Right? Shuckle, bend at the waist. Get into the davening. Some people get into the davening really enthusiastically, and the more enthusiastic they're davening, the greater the angle of the swaying. Where some people actually have enough energy to be bouncing up and down, bending at the waist, almost like aerobic exercises for the entire time of the davening. The Rebbe doesn't do that. When the Rebbe sways in the davening, he sways at the ankles, not at the waist. So the entire body is involved in the davening, but it's such a more elegant, dignified, humble, and modest. The Rebbe does things in his unique, original fashion. So just the way the Rebbe davened in general was already a surprise to me, because this is not what I was used to. It's not what I was familiar with, and it was very nice. When it came to the part of the bowing, by the moedim where you're supposed to bow, the Rebbe bowed his head, and it struck me at that moment that there is something awesome going on here. Because when the Rebbe bowed his head, it was tangible, even to a 13-year-old kid, that this was genuine humility. Bowing is an expression of humility. There was a genuine humility there that even a 13-year-old could feel. And the awe of it was, here is the greatest Jew alive, and he is humbled by something. What? What is humbling this man? And that's when I discovered that this God that we talk about and that we learn about and who we daven to and make brachas to is really awesome. Because he is so great that he humbles someone as... So in that bowing, when the Rebbe's head bowed, there was something very transparent about it. I didn't come there to worship God. I didn't come there to think about God. I didn't come there to find God. I didn't come there to experience godliness. I came there as a 13-year-old who thought that maybe this man was even greater than Mickey Mantle. So, if I see him davening in a unique and original way, that should increase my respect for him, my admiration of him. If I see him bow like a humble person, that should increase all the more my admiration of him. How did God get into the picture? Because there was something transparent about him. As great as he is, and as willing as he is to take full responsibility for your life and death decisions, he draws no attention to himself. He draws attention to what is out there. He draws attention to what is true. And that's that element of humility that comes along with total responsibility. There aren't many people who have that combination. If you have a humble person, then who is he to make decisions for you? And he won't do it. If you have a person who is willing to shoulder that kind of responsibility, then he is in charge and he expects something in return. One final word. True leadership, real leadership, is not only the ability to talk to deal with a wide variety of people, but also the ability to bring them together with each other, to unite them. Not only that the leader has access to all sorts of people, but that he shares that with the people themselves. When the Rebbe says, for example, that his greatest wish is that all Hasidim treat each other as one big family, the idea is that he could be perfectly content. He has access and he has the loyalty and the friendship of every one of the Hasidim. He could be content with that. But he's not. He wants everybody else to feel that same thing, to feel that same oneness, that same brotherhood. And if you're talking about a world leader, the world leader can be very comfortable and very content with the fact that he has access to the whole world. He can talk to people from every country, from every culture, from every background, from every race, from every color and every religion. But if he's a true leader, he's not content with that. He wants those very people to be able to talk to each other that way as well. And in order for that to happen, this world leader would have to come up with a principle that is substantial enough, that is significant enough to base a life on. And this one principle has to be equally relevant to every person in the world. The diplomat, the guy who knows exactly what to say to different people, will come to one country and speak a certain way, win their approval or their devotion. He'll come to another country, it's a whole different message. It's a whole different language. And he'll say what they want to hear or need to hear. And he'll win their support, admiration, or loyalty. But it's two different messages. And he could not say the same thing to both, because it wouldn't be relevant. A true leader, not just a diplomat, has one message, has boiled down the whole wisdom of the world, the wisdom of the ages, has boiled it down to one sentence. And that one sentence he will say to every kind of person he speaks to every kind of person who comes to him, and it will be exactly what that person needs to hear. How can that be if people are so different from each other? How can the same sentence be the relevant sentence, the relevant statement to all those people? Because truth is relevant to everybody. And if you can distill the truth down to one sentence, so that you can give that one teaching to all the people of the world and have it be relevant to all of them, that's a world leader. God gives the person who is responsible for the world the ability to speak to the world. If you're not responsible for the world, God doesn't give you such talents. God doesn't waste. So if you don't need it, you don't get it. The person who is responsible for the world is given a language that is universal, so that he can say the same thing to everybody in the world and have it be relevant. In the last couple of years, the Rebbe has distilled Torah down to one sentence. That is the one sentence that Jews need to hear most. It is the one sentence non-Jews need to hear most. One sentence. And that is, when God spoke to us at Sinai, he told us what he needs. That's it. That is the most relevant, the most truth statement that we can possibly make in today's day and age for any person in the world. If you're not religious, it's because you find no need or interest in religion. The Rebbe comes to such a person and says, that's not the point. The point is not that you need a religion. The point is that what God asked you to do at Sinai is because he needs it. How can you not do it for him? And then to the religious person who is suffering from the opposite, it's his religion, my religion, your religion, my God, your God, that kind of stuff. The Rebbe comes to that person and says, what are you doing? It's not your religion. What God said at Mount Sinai is what he needs. It's the same message to the ultra-Orthodox as to the atheist. And they both need to hear it desperately. If the whole world would abide by this one sentence, the instructions God gave at Sinai were his needs, not our needs. The whole world could rally around that. It is not a religious statement. It is not representing a particular religion. It's a universal truth. Everybody can relate to it. Everybody can rally around this. And if they did, not only would everybody be doing a good thing, but they would be doing the same thing. And that's probably what the prophet meant when he said that in the end of days, all nations will speak a similar language, a clear language, and they will serve God in a common effort. It's not enough that they will all serve God. It has to be serving God in a common effort. That everyone who does a mitzvah does it with the same, or from the same motivation, from the same orientation. It's what God wants that counts, so we're all in on doing it for him. That can unite a world. That can bring a harmony to a world without challenging or threatening or in any way diminishing the individuality of peoples, of nations, of cultures, of even individual people. It can bring morality to the world that is not easily corrupted, as is the religious morality that divides people, that gives people license to be immoral because they've been so good. It is the one sentence, the one message, the one statement that can do for the world exactly what the world needs. And that comes from a world leader. Hopefully, in a few days from now, that message will be heard on BBC, on National Public Radio, in at least all the English-speaking countries in the world. That there's a man in Brooklyn who has the following suggestion for the world. Be good, because that's what God wants. So, a world desperately in need of leadership couldn't possibly be left without leadership. God provides. The world has a leader. Not surprisingly, that leader is a Jew. Not surprisingly, he speaks in the language of Torah. And therefore, not surprisingly, he prepares us, the whole world, for the coming of Mashiach, when all of these things will be completed, when all of these things will be perfect, and the world will be perfect. And the result of all this perfection, Rambam, who was a world leader in his time, sums it all up, that in the end, the world will be filled with the knowledge of God. That's the end goal. That's the ultimate hope. That the world is filled with the knowledge of God. And that knowledge of God is the only thing we really need, the only thing we really care about, the only thing we strive for, the only thing we share with each other.
If you enjoyed this conversation or this topic, and you're looking for more information, or you want to hear it again from another angle, there is a way to do that. And that is in this book. It's all there. Order it from Amazon. You can read it, reread it, and share it.